Anticipate such a traffic while coming from the airport to this venue. But I would like to apologize nevertheless. I know it is a bit of a problem for all of you all involved here. I don't have much to say after Brigadier Saab, whom I've seen as a young boy myself in Tripura, having his counterinsurgency operations. Actually, he was there more to win the hearts and minds of the people there. I don't have much more to say after what he's elaborated very well. But being from the Northeast, more importantly, being from Tripura, and a boy and a person who studied all his life in the Northeast. I have done my education in Shillong, my college as well there, my school, college, everything was there. My political career started from the Northeast. Hopefully, it will carry on and we will remain there. Bangladesh is a extremely important element in a day in life. Popularly, when we speak about Tripura, we say Bangladesh and we look at opportunity. But Bangladesh also presents a lot of challenges. In 1964, when the story is based, most likely on the riots of Maiman Singh and Noakhali, a huge influx took place towards mainland India and northeast. In Tripura, the population of the state of Tripura rose by 157% between 1957 to 1965. What it did was it created instability within the state of India, within the state of Tripura. We had the population from Bangladesh, which was far more than the local population of Tripura. Nobody said a word then because there was a national zeal that we would like to liberate and sever Pakistan the way we had to pay the prices in the 1947 and post-partition. What it did was that it created a whole lot of problems for us locally in terms of tribal insurgency. Today, when we fast forward this entire scenario to Assam, there's a huge element of fear that Assam today will be flooded by migrants and refugees from Bangladesh. Now, there are two ways of looking at it, and one is something which I don't represent, which is in the living rooms, in where we say from the humanity point of view that people need to come across border and they need to be addressed, they need to be looked into. But the other point is that if, when you talk about infiltration, migration, yes, there are obviously because of certain needs and requirements what's happening there. But should it be the headache of one state, or should it be the headache of only one region to share the burden? And that is where my entire problem comes with migration. I spoke at the IMA last time, and somebody asked me, but why don't you look at it from the human point of view? And that's when I said, sir, if 300 people came over to Kargil, we went to war. 100,000 people came from Bangladesh, we called it assimilation. So that is where fundamentally we do have a bit of a problem. But then, on this note, this is something which, this book is something which is extremely important because it gives you a human, side of the story. Because when there is war, when there is displacement of people, it's not the politicians who suffer, it is not the policy makers who suffer, it is the common person on the street who actually suffers. And they don't obviously know why this is happening. But then the gap between Bangladesh, or at that time East Pakistan, or even Northeast today, is so far. People don't realize. In fact, my most obvious and common complaint is that people know so less about another part of India. And why is this? Recently I'd gone to meet a TV producer for a national TV channel. And he asked me, does Northeast have an airport? So I said, no, I came to Delhi by boat. But then that's what happens. People, I can understand if somebody said this in 1985, but if today somebody has a problem, Wikipedia it. But then no, it is fashionable to be ignorant, but you are only ignorant because most of the times, these so-called South Delhi, Southern Avenue, policy makers probably don't even care it. Saab is in Bastar, my sister is married there, in the mouse problem. The mouse problem only got more prominence when it came closer to Delhi. But for for decades, when they went on a hunger strike, nobody paid any heed to it. When they went on a bun, nobody paid heed to it. But the moment you picked up the gun, money starts flowing. And that is where you silence the moderate voices, when you don't respond to genuine democratic agitations and dissidents, when you only react to violence. Coming back to how these two regions can be, we could probably do more. Books like this will help. Simply for one reason. Someone from Northeast who has a lot of angst towards migration, as a tribal, as an indigenous tribal myself, reading this would probably give me a more sympathetic view of what people suffered when they came over. The same way, our voices also need to be heard throughout the country. So while it's really nice that she's come out with this book, I would also implore that you do a story of a family which suddenly overnight is moved out of a certain area because they don't belong to a vote bank. I see this as a Congress General Secretary. Point is that in this country, we need to understand each other more. You know, we spend so much time deciding, creating policies. We don't spend enough time on the ground. And what I do hope is that, I always bring up this story about how different there are two Indias. India is extremely different. We create a policy, we create an agenda, and then we forget about it. A couple of years ago, there was this seminar on farmers. And somebody told in Delhi, and somebody said that America has the best farmers, so let's get some of the Americans over to India, and we will have a farmers convention. So as usually, jo hota hai, farmers came from America and they were stuck up in a 5-star hotel. 5-6 din tak, they had deliberations, how to grow seed and so on and so forth. So this true American farmer, he was a typical son of a soil. He got claustrophobic. So one day he quietly got out of his hotel, went to the taxi driver and said, "Hey man, I want to go and see the real India." A typical Texan American accent. Taxi driver said, "Theek hai saab, chalo." They took him beyond Delhi, Gurgaon, Brijwasan, slightly the countryside. There he met a proud Indian farmer. Proper Jat tha usme. So he walked up to him and said, Hey, Indian farmer. He said, "Yes sir, boliye. How big is your farm?" So he said, "Sarji, you see the road this side?" So he said, "Yes." "Sarji, you see the river this side?" He said, "Yes." "Everything in between is my land," he said. So this American guy looked at him and said, "Hey, in Texas, I wake up every morning at 5:30, get into my tractor. By the time I'm in the eastern end of my farm, it's already 8:30. So I have my breakfast, have my grits, corn, get to my tractor again. By the time I'm in the eastern end of my farm, it's 12:30. So it's time for me to have some lunch, some marshmallow sandwiches, some jelly bean, get to my tractor again. And by the time I'm home, my tractor, it is 8:30 at night." So the Indian farmer looked at him and said, I know. I had a tractor like that once." That is what's happening with India as well today. Because a problem for someone in Delhi is very different from a problem in someone in West Bengal. And the same applies with someone whose problem in West Bengal is extremely different from someone's view in the Northeast. So with that in mind, yes, it's great to laugh. I think the best way of addressing a problem is also with a bit of humor. But most importantly, we need to address this problem. And Bangladesh is the reality. And for us to prosper is not to guard the fences, but to ensure that Bangladesh also prospers. Hence, the migration stops. But in the meanwhile, till the time another country doesn't, we need to do enough for the indigenous population living within the regions of Northeast to prosper as well. If we don't give our own people fair chance, then we will probably be looking at a generation which has lost itself because the policy of India was insensitive. I hope books like this come out more, because frankly, I will go through this book, and if there's some criticism, I will criticize, but if there is a praise, is that somebody as young as her has taken a step, which is a bold step. She could have written something on an easier subject. She's taken this, and I respect that, and I think we should all give it a shot. We should all give her a big hand. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We've heard two esteemed speakers speak in different aspects of across borders. We've covered the military aspect, the political aspect. I'd now like to invite Varun Chandra and Shuvashree to read from across borders to highlight to us what goes through in the social aspect, especially within the walls of a single family.
We start with the first chapter, Across Borders. Across borders, because I think the life that you depict out here is sort of shunts between this side, what used to be East Pakistan at one time, and then became Bangladesh and India, right? That. So it was raining even that morning. Funny how at this age, when I tend to forget what happened yesterday, images of childhood come back with such force and clarity. And if illustrations in a book I read every day. I can still hear the rain. It was hammering on the tin roof all morning. Ma stood by the window in silence, gazing at the downpour. Rains are a frequent visitor in Assam, but I had not seen Ma looking out the window so keenly before. Baba sat talking to Ranjit uncle, his cousin, who had arrived the previous night from Dhaka. Leaning back on the chair and smoking a cigarette, Ranjit uncle held forth like a teacher in a classroom, while Baba listened silently. Gandhi, Nehru, Mountbatten, he kept mentioning them. Only 8 at the time, I was not sure who they were, but was familiar with these names.
I vividly remember that day of 1948. I vividly remember that day of 1948. Rainy days were usually good days, or so it seemed to me until that day. 3 of our sisters were dressed and ready as usual, but were not sent to school. At first we thought it was due to the rain. Later we realized we were being readied for the sole purpose of meeting Ranjit uncle, a big man, we were told. Ma and Baba were present when I walked into the living room on the ground floor. I was fresh from bathing with water I had drawn from the well behind our house. Strong for my age, I had lifted the iron bucket from with a thick coir rope tied to it. After transferring the water into another bucket, I had carried it into the makeshift bathroom at a little distance from the house. My waist-length hair was still damp from the mugs of water I had poured over myself head downwards. I had dried it by wrapping a gamcha, the red and white cotton towel, over my head on my way back into the house. My damp hair had then been centre-parted and loosely braided in two, the ends tied together in red ribbons by my sister Kalpana. At 16, Kalpana was more a self-designated guardian. She followed me into the living room along with Nilima, our youngest sibling. We stood side by side, awaiting Ranjit uncle. Before getting ready, Kalpana had ensured that Nilima, 2 years younger than I, was also dressed. Her shoulder-length hair was tied with a red ribbon in a ponytail. 3 of us were identically dressed, in starched white shirts, pleated white skirts with red waist belts and red ribbons in our hair. We would wear white socks and black shoes before we left home. As we waited, I looked forward to our regular breakfast of chapatis or rice of the night before, soaked in milk, topped with generous helpings of milk, cream and sugar. I looked towards Ma, but she studiously avoided my gaze, looking out of the window instead at the rain. She looked very sad, and I thought I saw a thin film of tears in her eyes. Though curious, I chose to overlook it, as Ma looked sad more often than not lately. She even cried a lot. I think it began since Kalpana, Nilima and I returned with her from her maternal house. I would catch her flick the edges of her sari under her eyes, wiping the tears that trickled down her nose as she went about her daily chores.
It was not only Ma's recent tears that were strange. Circumstances seemed changed around here since our return. There was a new woman living in our home now. She was very pretty and occupied another wing of the house. I would look at her in awe, and so we did. I hardly saw Baba much lately. Perhaps he was very busy at his clinic and held his meals and slept there at night, I assumed. After all, he was a respected physician of the locality.
Now I restlessly wished the whole ritual was over, expecting Ranjit uncle to walk in any moment. I looked in Baba's direction as he sat on his reclining chair, reading a medical journal. I did not have the courage to disturb his reserve, so walked up to Ma, squeezing her fingers lightly. Then I tugged at her hand to get her attention. Ma, I'm very hungry, I said, when she looked down at me, questioningly on my persistent tugging of her hand. Can't we have breakfast and then meet uncle? We'll be late for school, won't we? Ma nodded in response, briskly looking away. She returned her gaze to the rain outside, as if it were an interesting book. I looked at Baba once again, hoping to draw his attention into saying something, figuring Ma was not going to make a move without his initiation.
Ranjit uncle will be down shortly, Baba replied crisply, but he hadn't removed his eyes from his reading material. Your mother will serve food after he is here. We don't want to offend him. Ranjit uncle walked in through the door as if on cue. His imposing height and frame suddenly increased the door's diminutiveness. It happened every time Baba crossed it with his head bent. I looked from one man to the other, noticing their close resemblance. With nearly the same height and athletic build, the cousins looked more like brothers, although dressed differently. Baba wore a crisply starched white dhoti kurta, while his cousin wore a white shirt and trousers with a black leather belt. Ranjit uncle's black hair, damp from a bath, was plastered on his swarthy face, emphasizing his prominent features, a large pair of eyes, and a big nose. He carried himself with a regal air, quite like Baba, with head held erect, ever over upright back and shoulders. On noticing him, Baba stood up respectfully, taking a step forward to greet him. Come, Ranjita. I hope you slept well, he said cheerfully, extending his right hand to take his cousins. The girls are all here. Taking Baba's hand, Uncle glanced at the three of us simultaneously. His gaze appraising our faces for a second each, he gushed, my pretty lady is also grown up. His broad smile now softening his otherwise stern expression, he added, I last saw them only months back during Durga Puja. They seem to have grown since then. From here, being transitory passengers, we jump to the riots. Alright, so we are in the middle of the riots, Bangladesh riots. There are lungi-clad men on the trot with lathis, daggers, spears and burning torches against the fading light of the setting sun. All shutters of shops are either closed or are being frantically pulled down, as those late to react will be looted and ransacked. Lucky if they can manage to save their lives. People are making a dash for shops or godowns still open in a bit to hide, not sure if they should stop to pick up a wailing child separated from their mother in the frenzy. There are partially burnt hulks of cars, serrated holes in places of their windows and windshields, dotting the city like campfires in a National Scout jamboree amidst pitched tents. Silent witnesses to the mass destruction and massacre. Thick smoke is wafting about, heavy with the stench of burning flesh, tires, charred cars, buses and rickshaws. There are pools of blood on the pavement where a man might have been beheaded with one flash of a machete. The body is skin ashen in death, has perhaps been removed by relatives or shop assistants after the rioters have moved ahead. Ambulances and police jeeps are rushing past, their blaring alarms merging jarringly, the red lights blinking furiously. Hospitals are thronged with the dead and the wounded, the mortuaries being combed in search of loved ones, in earnest prayer that they are not found, giving hope a chance to linger. Photos of missing people have been taped on walls of markets and stores. By now, trips to newspaper offices clutching photos taken at weddings, whether the missing person's own or attending that of loved ones, is forming cues. Sitting in the